all for granting me an opportunity to share with you all today. I'm very excited about this conversation. Um, as a young man in this work, seeing so many people reference George Washington Carver and his relationship with Booker T. Washington, it's even more poignant for me to be a part of this talk today. So I'm just going to jump into, some slides. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to interject, drop some comments in the chat. And Lindsay, thank you for moderating today. I'm going to just preface and expound a little bit about my background. I'm a native of Richmond, Virginia, which is in the Mid-Atlantic region. I'm born on the south side of Richmond, 41 years old. I got 3 kids, but I'm a child of the movement. And when I say movement, I mean movement for Black liberation. I spent the last 20 some odd years of my life dedicated to iterating programs and strategies to try to achieve some level of empowerment and betterment for communities of color, Black communities explicitly. As Lindsay talked, I started all this work as a volunteer at the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, which is the only Black History Museum, or the main statewide Black History Museum in the state of Virginia. But I begged them to give me a job. And I ended up getting that job, and that's when life just took off and launched me into this work. We started Happily Natural Day, and today's talk is going to be about the evolution of this work, right? And how we've centered Black institution building and the use of urban agriculture as a tool for regenerating and transforming the built environment in Black communities. Just for context, Richmond is 60 square miles, 46% Black, 45% white, 26% in poverty. So 1 in 4 people in the city of Richmond live below the poverty line. That poverty is concentrated in 2 parts of the city, the Richmond's East End and the South Side. And that's a byproduct of what we like to talk about with redlining. But before I even get to that, we know that Black people have a very, wild story when it comes to the Americas, but Virginia is a very important place as well. It's the first colony of this settler colonial experiment called the United States. So, 3 years ago, Virginia celebrated the 400-year anniversary of Jamestown. And it's important to reference that in this presentation, because we're talking about radical agriculture, getting to the root of the issues that our communities face. And I consider the Jamestown colony, the first colony of Virginia, to be somewhat of a ground zero for Black people in this country, when the 20-something odd African captives, our enslaved ancestors, got to Fort Comfort in 1619. We know that they were chattel. They were sold as property. And that is what changes the arc of our narrative here in this hemisphere. But when we start to talk about root causes, a lot of times people eyes gloss over, because we got to talk about slavery, but that's a long history and it's very complex. So we try to whittle it down. All right, let's start with redlining, right? Let's talk about the housing discrimination and the discrimination by the Federal Housing Administration that occurred all across the country, right? So in every metropolitan city, we had the Homeowners Loan Corporation going in, grading neighborhoods, denying Black people financing, denying Black people mortgages within the city. Here's a map of Richmond, but it's important to note that at the same time the FHA was denying Black people loans in the inner city, they were also, the FSA, Farm Service Agency, was denying Black farmers access to loans and programs in rural counties. So this is the New Deal was a bad deal for Black people. But I put this map up to kind of show also the concentrations of blighted, dilapidated, tax delinquent properties. Those are all the dots on these maps. The map shows the east end and the south side of Richmond. Again, furthering the context in the work that we do. This is a map of the USDAERS study that shows where access to healthy food is. And I'm hoping you start to see a pattern in these maps. This is a map of heat vulnerability, i.e. the places in the city where it's actually 10 degrees hotter due to lack of tree canopy in the city. And again, as I scroll through, I hope you're recognizing the patterns of where these inequities find themselves. These are the maps of evictions and affordable housing in the city of Richmond. Again, concentrations in the East End and the South Side of Richmond. So Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy. I know all of us have been made aware of all the uprisings and the rebellions over the last year, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. It struck Richmond and it landed on rooting these Confederate statues, right? So the first colony, the U.S. settler state, is only in 2021 taking down its monuments to Confederate generals. But even with the removal of these vestiges of slavery and white supremacy, we still see that the concentrations of wealth and poverty reflect those 1950s redlining maps. So it's one thing to do a cosmetic thing and, let's take down the statues. It's another to address the historical scars that are and trauma that our communities have faced. So this work for us, Happily Natural Day, we define it as Black liberation work. And in that definition, we try to expound that it's an intersectional practice of working with Black and Brown communities to secure systemic change and eradication of these inequities, right? We do this work through urban agriculture, right? Or what we like to also call regenerative placemaking, this idea of transforming the built environment in Black communities, right? And it's important to contextualize that because Black liberation work looks like a lot of things for a lot of different people, but in our context, our work is centered around agriculture. But it starts through this festival, Happily Natural Day. Happily Natural Day starts in 2003. And as Lindsay noted, at that time I was working for the museum. They didn't have enough money for the annual jazz concert. So we took on and proposed this idea of developing an event. This is right on the heels of Brown versus the Board of Education's 50th year anniversary. And if you're familiar with Brown versus the Board of Education, you know that there was the piece of, there was a psychological study by Kenneth Clark that was used as proof of the trauma and psychological damage that segregation was doing, i.e. the Black Doll study, right? Where young African-American children were presented with a white doll or a Black doll, and their choices of the white doll over the Black doll were referenced as evidence that Black people were experiencing really challenging conditions as a result of being segregated. We know that it's deeper than segregation, though, right? That this the psychological trauma of living in a white supremacist system has caused all types of inferiority complexes within our communities. A lot of things that we're trying to detox from: patriarchal systems, heteronormative ideas, even down to our classisms and the way that we stratify ourselves and trying to get in proximity to whiteness in order to achieve some level of quote unquote success in this country. But we use the festival as a tool to activate loving of ourselves as a form of resistance. Scholars, activists, artists, musicians would all come to this festival. And it's really important to note that we consider our work as a continuation of the work of people like Ilambe Brath from Harlem, and the African Jazz Arts Society and the Grandasa Models, which now has an exhibit up at the National Historic African American Museum of Culture in DC on the origins of the Black is Beautiful movement. But the event allowed us to really create bonds and people to create networks around Black activism, around art, around music, around just being in an experience of the diversity of Blackness. All right. But it's during these festivals that we make connections with Black farmers, right? It's important to note that immediately after the launch of the first festival, we joined the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, founded by Marcus Garvey, our local chapter, which took us on the road, DC, Baltimore, down to Atlanta, North Carolina, Harlem, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, meeting all of these Garveyites, right? Old and young, who were advocating for, these strategies to build self-determination for Black communities across the country. One of those individuals pictured here, Baba Aduno Tariq from Washington, D.C., will be one of those elders that will be in my ear every time I see him about the importance of gardening, the importance of food security. But even more specifically here in Richmond, Virginia, we were pulled to the side by one of our Black farmer elders, brother named Azebo Turner out of Gordonsville, Vanguard Ranch. And he would be the one that would ask us, what do you do if the grocery stores close, right? And it was a really striking question for me at the age of 26, a young father, had a 2-year-old. I didn't want to really talk to Brother Azebo about that because it raised my anxiety levels. But immediately after there, we had some climate weather events, major storms that knocked out the power in our community for weeks at a time, where we had to figure out, what do you do when the grocery stores close, right? So immediately around 2008, that's when we started the Richmond Noir Market. And these elders, these Black men, Aduno Tariq, Azebo Turner, even Salim Ahmed, who would be our first farmer, who would provide the produce for our pop-up farmers markets in formerly Redline neighborhoods. They would serve as the genesis of our work in local food systems and urban agriculture. Now, what does this look like for us? Urban farming, I like to position it in like a couple different ways. The first way is the traditional, urban ag ideas, like we take a vacant lot. In this picture, this is Jerusalem Connection, is one of our older spaces. 1 acre, where we transformed it into a production farm. We had two hoop houses, 2 high tunnels, multiple raised beds, addressing the issue of contaminants in the soil. Of course, in an urban area, you have to deal with those realities. But this became not only a production farm, but also a community asset, bringing children in, teaching adults how to farm in the inner city, because rural realities for a lot of folks have been elusive as folks have moved into the urban center, losing those relationships with the land, right? But traditional urban agriculture has been challenging, right? Not just because of the contaminants of the soil, but also because of the lack of land tenure that many Black folks in the city experience. Like, we don't own the land, we're usually renting. And even if we own the land, we don't own the land in any sense of magnitude to be able to develop a working operational farm that can really hold employment and wealth building strategies for our community in a significant way. The most challenging aspect to it, though, is that because we don't have land, we've often had to enter into these short-term, maybe even long-term leases. I mean, when I say long-term, 5 years, 10 years with private landowners. But those private landowners often get enticed by development. And so even if we have a lease with XYZ landowner, if they decide to sell, usually the clause inside of the lease would be we would have the first right to buy the property. But given that we don't have, access to capital, it usually ended up being some challenges where we had to move the farm. So considering that, our work has always lived in how do we develop long-term leases with more innovative partners that have a desire to keep spaces green or keep spaces in production as public green space. However, this work has also looked like the transformation of municipal buildings, right? Throwback to the map early on where I showed that there was vacant properties in former redline communities. You know, the concentration of these vacancies being in our communities, right? This provides creates a unique opportunity for us to transform underutilized municipal buildings into mechanisms for food production in our community. In this example, this is the Harding Street Urban Ag Center, which was spearheaded by Virginia State University. We were able to transform this former rec center into an indoor farm, right? Aquaponics, vertical farming, aeroponics, trialing various indoor growing methods, in addition to a commercial kitchen that we installed inside of the space, cold storage that we installed inside of the space. We even cut a dock door into the side of this rec center to provide space for farmers to come and drop off and or pick up produce. We put solar on the roof of the building, enough to power the entire operation, as well as to generate revenue from net metering, or you sell solar back to the power company because you're actually generating more energy than you're using when the space is not in use. This entire effort was funded by a $2 million USDA NIFA grant. Dr. Marcus Comer of the College of Agriculture Cooperative Extension hired me because he had heard about the work that we were doing in the city of Richmond around transforming vacant lots, connecting Black farmers to SNAP, and then selling food inside of food desert communities. So this evolution of the work landed us into this space of high technology and innovation, smack dab in the middle of the hood. And when I say smack dab in the middle of the hood, I mean like you walk out the block outside, and you know there might be somebody scrapping, you know, and it might be somebody drinking some 40s and smoking cigarettes right across the street. Like that's how, you know, embedded this space was. And so, you know, our work lived explicitly in making the connection for the community, Black community in that space as to why this is relevant. Why is it important for our community to learn how to grow our own food and understand that there's multiple ways that you can do it, even if you can access and DIY the technology, right? Because this is very expensive stuff. I mean, the principles are important, like irrespective of whatever amount of money you got, but it costs money to buy LEDs and all that type of fancy smancy technology. But it's still a reality that we need to access, because the controlled environment agriculture industry is $1 billion industry. And there are very few Black people that are at the table in that space. So it's another conversation that we need to be having about ag and how we as Black farmers engage in smart agriculture and ag tech as before we get locked out of that space, as we're already experiencing the challenges in traditional ag space. And so today, our work is now evolving and ever-changing to address the land tenure issue. We've partnered with our city, the Richmond city of Richmond, as a municipal government, of course, has access to a park system, right? And so what we've been successful in doing is tapping into their park system in partnership to permit vacant property that the park system holds ownership over. This particular space is called Sancofa Community Orchard. This is a space that we've developed as a result of COVID, to be perfectly honest. It was the COVID crisis that put us on the path of doing what we call resiliency gardens. And 2020, March 2020, we had already been in in the work of training people in community, you know, developing solutions, working with communities to develop solutions for green space in their community. But COVID put pause all that. We really couldn't gather. So we started delivering people raised beds, right? The delivery of these raised beds, I think we did like 400 raised beds by the end of 2020. But we got tabbed to develop an exhibit with an existing institution, one of these art museums, and they gave us a corner, a vacant parking lot, and where we put in raised beds and trees and murals and the whole thing, right? Really amazing space. But when we knew it was going to be a finite exhibit, like it was going to close, they gave us the trees though, and all the materials that we developed this space with. And we said, the question was, well, what do we do with all these trees, all these fruit trees? We had like 30 fruit trees. So we identified this vacant lot on the Richmond South Side. Go back again to some of those maps that you saw about concentrations of poverty and inequity in South Side. This space had been vacant for 60 years. In the 1950s, there was a flood that came through, a major hurricane, major storm event that flooded out 3 houses that existed on this piece of property, right? City took possession of the property, tore the houses down, and had been cutting the grass for 60 years. No programming, nothing, just empty space with grass. So we said, okay, well, we would like to transform this space into an orchard. Went through the proper permitting process, got all the required documentations necessary, planted those initial 30 trees, turned around through our collaborations with community, ended up over the last year planting over 80 fruit trees, 90 plus fruiting shrubs from blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, permeable pathways as a tool for stormwater management, rain catchment systems, collecting thousands of gallons of water on the space, as well as the solar powered shipping container that we converted into a work shed and outdoor kitchens in the space. This space also features almost 10 murals of different Black liberation worker personalities, everyone from Fannie Lou Hamer to George Washington Carver, George Jackson, Amilcar Cabral, Claudia Jones, Assata Shakur, these different personas to remind us of the work that we should be doing in community, and also to designate this space when Black people come, that there is a space that belongs to them, that they actually can participate in and learn these different techniques of growing food and etc. So I'm gonna be finished in this few seconds. We get to Q&A, but I just want to also talk about where we go from here. Like the work that we've been doing around transforming the built environment is still hindered by several challenges. Of course, land ownership is one of those major ones, but we've been tapping in to strategizing for land justice. So our work now is in collaboration with community land trusts. So we're building an Aggro Hood, which is a neighborhood development that centers a farm as an amenity for the neighborhood. We're working with one community land trust here in Richmond called the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, which I'm on the board. They do affordable housing. I know many of you may already know what a community land trust is, but essentially it's a nonprofit entity that holds land, right, and acquires land for community control. So what the community land trust does is that it will own the physical land beneath the house, but then someone else, me, Lindsay, anybody can purchase the home as a starter home, right? And that could serve as a method for you to have an affordable home, use that as a wealth building strategy, sell that home to the next person, and then use that use the equity that has been built up in that home for you to buy whatever piece of property that you want to buy in 5 to 7 years, right? So in this particular juncture, it's a collaboration between Happily Naturally, my organization, the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, and another organization called Girls for Change that's working to create a pipeline for wealth building for Black girls. Explicitly, the young ladies will be the ones that we're trying to get the homes to that are on the property. And of course, the farm would have a subscription program of produce that will be an amenity for the folks that live in that community, like a HOA fee, right? So this is an image of our initial concept diagrams. We're already at the site assessment stage, getting ready to get into the rezoning of the property. This is about 8 acres of land. We anticipate putting 7 homes on the property and 3 rental properties, in addition to event space, community area, and the farm. And by the way, this is not a new concept. New Communities Incorporated, Shirley and Charles Sherrod have been doing this work since the 70s, 60s. We're just iterating upon that same model here in Richmond, Virginia. Our work is informed by the Sherrods and their efforts in Georgia. And then the second piece is we're another land trust that we just launched here in Virginia called the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons. This effort is designed to create interchange between rural communities and urban communities. White woman came to the table, said she wanted to donate 80 acres of her land to Black and Brown communities. So she's making the donation to the land trust. The land trust, which is all Black and Brown people led, will then redistribute that land to Black farmers or homesteaders, I should say. And then in the inner city, we are identifying property that could serve as aggregation space and processing space for produce that is being grown in the rural community that can then be distributed into the urban space. So this is important because, you know, we often talk about white allies, right? So the Agrarian Trust is a larger body that we were collaborating with. And so basically, you know, their access and proximity to white wealth, to capital and resources, their work is to fundraise for land acquisitions explicitly for Black and Brown community control. So our work now is kind of figuring out how to engage with rural communities with an explicit Black focus. As you might imagine, you know, some of our rural areas in Virginia and many other states are very far right and conservative. So we've run into some impasses with dealing with public comment periods during planning commission meetings where the racism shows up very astutely. When folks say they'll be afraid to come outside of their house if all these Black people or brown people move into the neighborhood. But that's not a hindrance. We're even without the rezoning, we have two 40-acre plots that we're intending on making sure that goes to Black folks. The vision was to rezone the plots so that we can do at least 10 homes on each 40-acre plot. So yeah, I'm gonna close off by saying, you know, this is the arc of the work that we're engaging in. The vision and focus is on transforming the built environment. Our work is respective of the fact that we need access to land, period. And land is power, whether it's urban or rural, we need both. And we need to create systems that allow them to synergize in ways that our food system is controlled by Black people. And I'm gonna leave you with the quote by Assad Shakur: "It's our duty to fight for our freedom. It's our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains." Thank you very much.
Woo, thank you very much. I feel like there would have been like crowd applause right there. So appreciate
Well, thank you.
I'm seeing comments coming in. Awesome presentation. Love that beautiful graphic. Thanks for leaving us with this Carver image. I think it'll be great to have as our backdrop for the Q&A portion. So everyone, please give Mr. Chavis your comments in the chat box. Let him know how happy you are with the presentation. And then you'll notice on the bottom of your screen next to participants, there's a button that says Q&A. You can go ahead and click that. And if you have any questions you'd like asked and answered in this session, I'll look there first for those. So I already see one coming in. So I'm gonna ask you this one. And this is coming from Miss Lucy Bob. She says, great work, great presentation. I love the name Sancofa as part of the community name. Can you throw more light on the choice of the name and its connectivity to history, current, and future progress? Great question and great work.
Yes, thank you. So we chose, and by the way, this image is a mural that we commissioned from local artists in our communities by the name of S. Ross Brown. So at the Sancofa Community Orchard, we've painted many murals of different individuals, but this one is we had to put in George Washington Carver, right? I mean, there's no way that you can talk about Black agriculture without talking about George Washington Carver. But the name Sancofa, it's an Akan sigil representative. You usually see it in two forms. One, it looks kind of like a heart, and then in another form, it looks like a bird looking back behind itself, eating an egg, right? And so the idea of Sankofa, the meaning of it is for you to go back and learn the lessons from your past, apply them to your present so that you have a brighter future. So really the name Sankofa for us was representative of Black future, radical imagining of Black futures, right? That we've already done this stuff, right? That none of what we're doing with urban agriculture or rural agriculture, none of this stuff is new, right? But that we're looking back to the past for the patterns and strategies that have been implemented that we can then pull those jewels, whether it's Freedom Farms with Fannie Lou Hamer, or the strategies of decolonization with Amilcar Cabral, or even the intersectionality of a Claudia Jones, understanding that Black people have multiple identities, especially Black women have trifold identities, one as Black woman, one as Black, one as being a worker. Like, how do we pull the jewelry that our ancestors have left us and put that on and use those jewels as guiding lights for us moving, forward in this work, right? So Sankofa for us is more of a verb, more than just like, an idea. It's the active practice of reflection, right? Introspection, reassessment, identifying what's working, what's not working, right? And then reapplying or reiterating the strategy based off of what we learned before, or what we've done before, and what we've seen before. I.e., even New Communities Inc. as a model for engaging land for housing and farming for Black folks. Like the community land trust industry, it's like predominantly white right now, but the first community land trust is Charles Sherrod and Shirley Sherrod in Georgia, right? So, that's really the impetus, is like, how do we pull these ideas to into our today, right? And refine them in ways that, you don't know your history, you don't know where you're going.
Love that. Also, if I could just throw a fun fact on there as well, because Lucy is Ghanaian, and I do believe those Ndinkra are also from the Asante people and also come from Ghana. So I feel like Lucy might have been trying to throw us a little trick out there, or like adding that on. But thank you for that beautiful answer, and thank you, Lucy, for your beautiful question. And I'm gonna keep us moving because you're getting a lot of questions in the chat box. So while I have time to synthesize those, let me sneak in my question really quick, and then I'll get right back to the chat box. Sure. I noticed that you were explicit in naming the need to advocate explicitly for Black folks. Could you talk a little bit about why it is important or relevant to explicitly advocate for Black people?
Yeah. So, first of all, the way that I interpret this work is that, Black people have been hit, just like Indigenous and Black people in this country have been hit first. The U.S. Experiment only exists as a result of the dispossession of Indigenous people and the extraction of Black labor, right? And those two concurrent realities are what allows whiteness, white supremacy, this country to exist, right? So in order to address the inequity, right, we have to like be explicit in the solutions and who you're targeting, right? So there's one thing to say, okay, we're going to do this for everybody, but everybody's not affected in the same way by the system. Everybody hasn't had the same experience. So from a racial equity, by putting a racial equity lens on this work, we're able to create solutions with communities explicitly directed and being delivered around their needs. And so our needs in this context are, of course, addressing the wealth inequities, addressing the public health inequities, and addressing the home ownership or land ownership inequities. Like those are the three spaces that I think, like, no matter where you might find yourself as a Black person, like, somebody that's dealing with that reality. 98% of farmland is owned by white folks, right? So land inequity for Black people as farmers is a very pressing reality. Mortality, if you're a Black woman, Black families, we talk about the maternal health crisis, right? And like 1 in 3 Black women are dying in childbirth, right? So these realities are all inextricably linked to the history of this country. So we target Black folks because it's important for us to be the determiners of our own reality and our own solution. We have to design those solutions. We have to implement those solutions. And then we had to be accountable for the realities that come out of those solutions. But other communities can play a role too, right? Because if folks feel like they're human, well, I'll say this. I think the battle for America's soul is in whether or not white folks understand that a harm has been done to Indigenous and Black people in this country. And once they realize that a harm has been done, them developing strategies to undo that harm.
Thank you so much. We are almost to the close, but I'm going to try to sneak in 2 more questions. So one question that we have right here. What are some of the traits or abilities of those that emerge as leaders in your team and partnerships that move things forward? How do you move around those people or forces that attempt to hold you back? So that's kind of like a 2-part. So since you work with so many people, of the people that you work with, how do you identify the traits and abilities of the leaders? And then how are you able to move around some of those forces that hold you back? And I saw a couple of questions around that. So that kind of hits at a couple questions together.
Yeah. So first of all, like I'm a big advocate for adaptive leadership and non-hierarchical systems of leadership. While I feel like I'm an introvert, right? But I had to become extroverted in order to secure the things that need to be done. So in that, we do a training program, and our training program deals explicitly with these ideas of community trust building, right? While it might sound like whoop-de-whoop, kumbaya, butterflies, and cupcakes, trust, relationship building, authenticity, transparency, honesty are the rudimentary bricks and glue that holds all of this stuff together. Like none of this work can be done without people honoring one another, respecting one another, showing up as their full selves, being disciplined, being transparent, and being honest when stuff messes up, right? Like it doesn't always go as planned, right? And so being able to come to the table and show up and own those failures and own those victories is one of the ways that we're able to I feel like identify leaders. And it's like my idea of what a leader is not necessarily what everybody else is. I mean, manager might be a different term, right? So I might need managers for these different spaces who understand the different components, and they're able to apply some initiative and develop strategies to get things done without it being one centralized person that has to answer all the questions. But that's different from what most people term as quote unquote leaders. Like we don't really yearn for like charismatic individuals. We want people that are fully invested in being a part of the solution, irrespective of their level of charisma or their ability to articulate what the problem is. But how do we move around people who are hindrances to the work? I mean, man, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the ways is this, trying to like be mindful that we're human beings, you know what I mean? And like trying to figure out what people's interests are. Like, what exactly is it why are you being a problem? Like trying to get to the root of that more than like trying to see people and moving away from seeing people as obstacles. You know what I mean? It's been one thing. I mean, we've had a lot of headbutts with municipal government, city, other nonprofit leaders, especially white ones who might not understand racial equity. And sometimes you just got to be like, yo, you can't go through the mountain. You got to go around the mountain. You know what I mean? Sometimes, it's harder work to deal with these individuals. And at times you got to figure out, okay, well, we're going to isolate you in this situation and we're going to attack it from a different angle without having to go through you. And we live in the era of like cancel culture and all that type of stuff. And I mean, at times we had to pull the trigger on a couple of folks that were bigoted, you know what I mean, in the system and be like, yo, we got to get you out of here. But I mean, those are rare, because of the, folks have kind of identified the work that we've done as important. So folks don't want to be in a way of what they see as a mass movement, you know what I'm saying, of activity, and they can see the demonstrable, tangible, practical change. I find it hard to imagine people want to stand in the way of something that they see is actually happening, right? Because what they do is like, you show your hand. If you're a racist or conservative or alt-right or whatever, if like you see this work bubbling up, you know what I mean, and you want to stand against it, you're kind of showing your hand. So nobody in this era really want to be that guy. So we focus harder on like, okay, let's just do the great work and then keep our eyes peeled for whoever's going to show up to add on to the work and recognize that we're not the end all. You know what I mean? Like there's other people out here that's doing amazing stuff. We haven't met them, or maybe they haven't met us, but staying open to them showing up and meeting them on a playing field of humility. You know what I mean? Like this is all through God's grace. This ain't me, this ain't her, him. This is, a greater force that's moving us towards freedom and liberation. And it ain't about me, because I might be gone tomorrow, but this should still continue to go. You dig?
Ashe. Well, thank you so much. So much. You're still getting a lot of comments. Anyone that's interested in following closer to the work, if you want to contribute to the work, please follow Duran on DuranChavis.com. You can hear him speak at his TEDx talks and so much more. We thank you for staying in the fight, for going around the mountain, for getting up the mountain, and for bringing so many of us with you. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you all so much for your time, and head over, click the link to get to the next one. And we look forward to working with you in the future, Mr. Chavis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so humbled and appreciative of this opportunity. It means the world to me to be here. Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.